I was just going to say,
Okay. My name is Nick. I'm with I would say podcast, but it's not really a podcast. It's a YouTube channel called Next Generation Saints. Where basically, I'm answering biblical questions from a scientific, theological, and social and practical issue. So we basically open up to anyone's questions. You either agree, disagree, where you're coming from. Go ahead and ask them.
okay. And I have, before I introduce myself to you, you probably know, I don't know how much of my channel you watched, but
A couple of videos. I
okay.
haven't had a whole lot of time today, so I've been running errands.
But I have to ask this first before we get started. Otherwise, I'm going to be
Sure.
bothered the whole night.
Okay.
What are you wearing around your neck?
Oh, I know. You see, I have been asked that so many times. No, this is not from Moana, the movie. I got this. My family went to Maui, to Hawaii, and I always wear necklaces, and I love to fish. That's my big thing. I love fishing, and so this is a fish hook from the islands that they're supposed to give to you when you actually show that you're a fisherman and you whatnot. And plus, it looked pretty cool. So I got it before the movie.
Okay.
Yeah, just clarify a little.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. Okay. So, my name's Doug. I basically
Excuse me.
do this channel for a couple of reasons. Number one, I enjoy it, usually. Number two, I believe doubt's a virtue. And I believe that doubt, in general, doubt's a virtue. You know, there's exceptions, of course, but I believe that doubt can lead to humility,
Absolutely, yeah.
and certainty can lead, not always, but can lead to arrogance and violence.
Yes,
So I like to
absolutely.
so I like to put my cards on the table and let you know that I was a believer in Jesus for 30 some years. And in case you're a Calvinist, I will say I was a professing Christian for 30 years. In my mid 30s, I lost my faith by basically viewing myself from the third person perspective and asking questions like, how are people viewing me? And saying, look, it's okay to doubt. If it's true, I should be able to come through this.
Hmm.
And so I started from square one in my mid 30s and said, I'm not just going to assume that the Bible's God's word, and
Right.
went from there. And I think a lot of Christians appreciate that.
Hmm.
So that that's a very very brief summary of me. I don't want to bore the people watching who know me well and have heard this 1,000 times, but
Yeah.
you can ask me questions as we go.
I think you actually brought up a really good point. I think that it'd be foolish of any person to look at the Bible and go, I'm going to look at it as the Word of God. I never approached it that way. In fact, I approached it more of a historical reference when I first looked at it. But at the same time, while studying the Gospel, I realized that a lot like Genesis is Hebrew poetry. You have Leviticus, Kings, Deuteronomy, which is historical narrative. You have Psalms, which is easily poetry again. There's a whole bunch of literary context and style. So whenever someone asks me about the gospel, and the gospels really are actually Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because gospel in Greek means good news. And that's what they were delivering. That's what they were claiming to historically deliver. Never read it as just the word of God. Never approach it and go, well, the Bible has to be a word of God because I heard some pastor at some Baptist area tell you to do it. In fact, don't approach it that way. Approach it as historical narrative and then research.
Okay, I can appreciate that. Um, when I was coming out of Christianity, I didn't even assume that it was historical narrative.
Yeah, if you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and I'm just going to touch on these ones. When I read them going through, because when I first became a Christian, I was a very hard skeptic. I didn't really believe in any of that stuff. I didn't. I was very much more into science, and I still am. But I was more of an atheistic point of view. And when I researched it, the one thing one of my friends told me is just read it and see what you think. And I read it, and it really read more like the LA Times, like the New York Times, like the Washington Post. It really read like a newspaper. And then I started reading history books, and I started realizing that these people are talking from a vantage point of history, and that's what they're making the claim of. And that's so I was like, okay, if this is making a historical claim, is the history true? And that's when I had to switch from conventional science of repeatability of experiment, observation of that experiment, something you see on Mythbusters or take place in the classroom, or you see at UCLA or Berkeley. I had to approach it in the sense of how do you study history? And really, history boils down to the trustworthiness of eyewitness testimony. So the question I'd ask was, is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are they telling the right thing? Is Mary...
Before we get into details, let me
Yeah, sorry.
let me ask you very general question. What would you say to someone, for me, for example, who asked you, what is the primary reason you're a Christian today? What would you say?
The primary reason I'm a Christian is, and it's going to sound strange, but I'll be honest with you, is because Jesus came into my life one day and he became very real. When Jesus came into my life and introduced himself, I know it sounds strange, maybe even some atheists who've never experienced this. So I'm going to try to put it into words that are easily understandable. When he showed up into my life, the first thing that happened was I was skeptical and I started reading the gospel. When I became a Christian was when I studied the evidence of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, of Jesus' life, teachings, death, and resurrection. I realized that's when I decided that the evidence pointed to his reliability in a way that no other historical reference from any other religion could fulfill.
Okay, so how old were you when you experienced this?
I was approximately 18 years of age.
18?
Yeah.
Okay. And so when you were 18, is that when you started the investigation into the Gospels?
I started the investigation into the Gospels when I was about 17, actually. That's when I first started feeling like the presence of Jesus into my life. It was hard to explain, but I started feeling this presence of him. And so I started seeking more information out. And I said, I first went to a friend of mine and said, hey, I feel like maybe Jesus is talking to me, but I don't even know if this is real because it doesn't make any logical sense. How can a guy who lived 2,000 years ago possibly make a connection? And so they said, okay, well, maybe you should research this. So
When you say you felt Jesus talking to you, sorry to interrupt, but
no problem.
I'm very, very interested in this. When you say that you felt Jesus talking to you, what do you mean exactly?
Well, it felt like when I was doing things, let me explain. Like if I was listening to a teacher, and I could feel like, you could almost say like a conscience kicking in and talking to you. And it was not like coming from my head. I felt it like it was coming out of my heart and talking. I know it sounds really strange, and I get that. But that's ultimately what I felt coming. I know, like I said, coming from an atheist point of view, it's very difficult to understand. So I'm trying to put it in words that are easier to understand, but it's hard to.
I actually do understand. You have no reason to believe me, but I know what you're talking about because my wife's a born again believer, my whole family, and like I said, I was a Christian for 30 years, and so. But yeah, you're right. There's probably a lot of people who don't know what you're talking about. But
right. Well, the other issue is when it comes down to say someone said they heard a voice from God. Or like I was talking at one point I was putting up all this information, and one of them was a Mormon talked to me and said, you can feel it burning in your chest, and I was like, I did medical research. Yeah, you're right. I did some medical research into that because that sounded very much like something medical, and it turns out that's called heartburn. So I was like, that's not what I'm feeling. And on top of that, I also had some hot some jalapenos on pizza, so I felt what that was, and I knew that was completely different.
So you had this feeling like you're sort of like your conscious talking to you, but it wasn't coming from your head; it was coming from somewhere else. But
coming from the heart.
How did you arrive at the conclusion that this was Jesus? Like, how did you even know Jesus's name?
Well, I was raised in a Christian home. I won't deny that, but I was never religious. I didn't really believe in any of it. It was kind of like when those atheists say, I was raised in a Christian home, like Christopher Hitchens would say, I was raised in a Christian home, but I never actually believed. So I was in that environment. And so I didn't know originally, but it's kind of like when someone comes up to you and talks to you, you can tell by the tone of the voice and the way they're speaking to you who it might actually be. It kind of felt like Saul felt, when you're reading in the Bible and you come across the book of Romans, you come across a guy named Saul of Tarsus, who was a persecutor, and one of the things happened is when he ran across Jesus, he never met Jesus in real life. He never talked to him, shook hands with him. He never sat down and had dinner with him. And yet, when he came across Jesus, he knew he was. But one point I want to bring up is when I had that experience, I didn't automatically go, "Yes, it's Jesus, I believe." I was very much of okay, something happened. There was an issue, something took place here. Like, say if someone claims they had a UFO encounter. I want to do much more research because I'm so skeptical. I was skeptical of my parents. I was skeptical of my family. I was skeptical of my church. I was skeptical of everything, which is very healthy, which is what you said as well. And so I researched into who Jesus was to see if this experience had been repeated throughout history. Was it unique? Was I a fluke? Was I having medical issues of some sort? Was I having, was there something wrong with my head? And so I went through all these things. Went to the hospital. I went to my doctor. I checked. I researched through history. And I really found that the Bible was talking that God approaches every person uniquely, but this is not uncommon to have happen. And so that's when I started, okay, let me really research into this. Let me see who Jesus is from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Does he talk about this? And it says that, yes, he does. He communicates to the Holy Spirit, and he prepares your heart.
Do you think that and I'm sure you've heard this many times before, but
Go ahead.
Do you think if you would have been raised in a different home, in a different part of the world, and had the same feeling that you would have arrived at a different conclusion?
I've had that same question brought up to me multiple times, and there's and obviously there's some validity to it, because if you look at it like in the Middle East, as you undoubtedly would know, if you were over there, you'd be raised you would be raised Muslim. If you're in India, you'd probably be raised more Hindu. If you're raised in China or Japan, Buddhism. And that's true. There is a very strong influence of that. And a lot of people do become those because of the location they're at. But the problem I can foresee with it is, say, like my fiance was once Roman Catholic, now she's Christian because the experiences she's having reading the Gospels and actually researching all the religions is it's not so much about becoming spiritually enlightened automatically. It's also questioning your beliefs. If you're a Buddhist, question what you're believing in. If you're a Hindu, question the avatars of Hinduism. If you're Muslim, question Muhammad and Allah. Check them out. See what's going on. And for me, that's really what it was. It was a questioning of...
Okay, so is it fair to say that you had this experience and you're trying to figure out, okay, what is the source or the cause of this experience?
Yes.
And people from all over the world might go through what you went through, and you investigate, okay, this feels or sounds or could be spiritual in nature, and then you do the investigation, and then you end up saying, oh, yes, this is the religion that is correct. Am I hearing you right?
Well, yes and no. What it is yes, I totally agree that I researched to make sure what I had, what the experience was, because an experience can be anything. It could be a spiritual experience. It could just be a medical experience that you're having. It could be really anything. Now, when you're talking about religion, one big thing I want to point out here on the live broadcast is I hate religion, period. Religion has done nothing but horrible things. In fact, Jesus in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John was very harsh towards all the religious leaders. Religion is man-made invention. You look at the Catholic Church, you see a man-made invention half the time.
So you're talking about more the personal relationship is what you...
Yes, this is what Jesus, because you know as a Christian, that Jesus never once said, hey, guys, I'm the Messiah, become religious. He said, guys, I'm the truth, the way, and the life. Come and follow me. That's what he was saying to everyone. He told every disciple he came across. Remember when he went when he was baptized, he went down to Sea of Galilee and he saw Peter and his brother James. He said, follow me. He didn't say, hey, go to church.
So how did you eliminate when you had this experience, how did you eliminate the possibility that it was a medical issue?
Well, when I was asking about that, I was asking, the biggest part I had was because of the feeling I got in the heart. And I thought that was probably most likely heartburn. Now, you can try to put as many things as you want into it. But I went to the doctor and I asked them about the heartburn. They said that I actually am not prone to heartburn. I told them the timing of the day when it was happening. They asked me for my dietary supplement. What was I having that day? Basically, eliminating the possibilities of what it could be scientifically, and what kind of food you could be eating that could cause such an experience. When I explained to them what happened, they did a blood test on me and found that I'm not having a lot of heartburn. Like, I've had it before, but I had to have strong foods that I wasn't eating that day, or had the night previous, or 2 days in a row, because that's, what medical researchers have said is you feel the effects of what you're eating about 2-3 days after, even after you've eaten them. That's why you can get like upset stomachs and whatnot. If
Okay.
that makes any sense. They may have changed that, but that's what I understand of it.
Because one thing that I'm thinking about is, I just Googled it now.
Of course.
7% of women hallucinate, and 5%
Okay.
of men.
Okay.
So
So,
how did you? And then I don't know your experience. I'm not degrading your experience. I'm not lessening it
no,
at all.
understandable.
Please understand this. But
Right.
what I'm concerned about is, how did you figure out that what you experienced was maybe something purely biological?
Well, you have a really good point. And no, it's not insulting. It's a very logical question what you bring up, because that's the very first thing I thought of as well. But when I saw a doctor over in a hospital field for when they do, you know, they call it childhood medical research onto it. But I was like, because I was 17 when I experienced it, so I still fell under it by state law. I also went to a psychiatrist and I had myself checked out to see, am I, because the biggest thing on is, of course, it's possible. The question is, what's the evidence that it would lead that way? And the psychologist gave me a full bill of health and said, no, you're fine. You're not hallucinating anything. You're not going crazy in any medical way of saying it. And then when I looked at when I talked to my doctors about like whether I have heartburn or some other medical condition, they said you probably ate something a week ago, but honestly, nothing that would have had that effect at that time and that place during
Well,
that
yeah,
hour.
I agree with you. It's probably not food. From what I actually know a person who works with a facility that deals
Mm-hmm.
with mental health patients.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it has to do with not things like food, or even, how do I say it, like problems with an organ in your body, but things like stress, anxiety, sleep schedules out of whack. And I've talked to a lot of people and interviewed them, and it seems like I have witnessed a pattern of between the ages of 18 and 22 is when
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these experiences happen. Not to say they can't happen later than that. And that's, when your hormones are cranked up.
Oh yeah.
You're usually in college or high school, and
Mm-hmm.
you're stressed. Sleep is an issue, and so you're trying to figure out who you are as a human being,
Mm-hmm.
and all those factors. Like, to be honest, when I was in my early 20s, I think I was 21.
Mm-hmm.
I had a experience where I thought I was paralyzed by the devil. And in my bed, it was late at night. I wasn't asleep, but I was like sort of half asleep. And I remember
Mm-hmm.
lying on my bed and feeling like the devil was pinning me to the bed, and I was paralyzed.
Right.
And I prayed in Jesus' name, and he went away.
Right. I think, honest, when it comes you have a really good point, actually. Sorry if I mumble a little. You have a really good point. And that's why I went to go check on the doctor to see if any of those possibilities were there. And that's why, like I said, they gave me a clean bill of health on all those. So it really had nothing to do with the
But what I'm describing
psychological.
is something that wouldn't really come out of a blood test or a.
Right.
It is more
Well,
of a.
the blood test was to see whether or not the medical issue was like heartburn, or your how prone you are to heartburn, because you can have extra acids in your blood system due to the fact that it leaks through your stomach. So that's what I was referring to on the blood test. Now, when I'm talking about the psychological part, that's when they put on the probes. They test you. They ask you questions. They have a little machine that they put probes across here, and they can check your neural output waves and whatnot. And usually you can find abnormalities into that. Now, it's not 110% foolproof. Nothing in science in that area is 110% foolproof at all. But the evidence that my doctor was telling me, my psychiatrist was telling me, was there's nothing there. That it was as you would suggest. It's just a normal teenager, nothing out of the ordinary. There's no hallucination taking place. hormones are going, but that's what's happening. But this was not hormonal.
Yeah. Okay.
Otherwise, you expect like
And you
mood
could be
swings.
right. Like, I mean, it could have
Right.
been something spiritual. I'm an agnostic
Well,
atheist who doesn't discount that. However,
right.
as a skeptic, I guess I always ask the what's more likely question.
Right. Well, once those things are knocked out, and I found afterwards, and I'll lead it forward a little bit, was after I found out that it was not a psychological issue, and I had a clean, full bill of health, and I had multiple doctors check me out because that's just, to make sure you don't get just one opinion, you want to get multiple sources. That's when I started really into what did other religions say, what did the Bible say, what is going on here, and as I was researching more, I found that the evidence led more to the fact it was what Jesus was doing versus what any other religion was saying.
Okay, so
So,
let me paint a picture now
okay.
of someone named Nate who lives in India,
Mm-hmm.
and Nate has, and I don't know the details of your experience, but in this thought experiment, Nate, who lives in India, has the exact same experience that you had,
Okay.
and he did exactly what you did, went to the doctor and everything.
Okay.
Then says, okay, I've eliminated that possibility. It's not biological, it's not physical. But Nate's a skeptic and says, I could be wrong. Maybe it is still, and the doctors just didn't find it. But he then starts looking for spiritual explanations, and end story, it was Vishnu. And he researched it, and he just, Christianity didn't make sense to him, and Judaism and Islam and Buddhism.
Well, that's the problem I have with it, because if you're putting in that frame, then obviously what you're saying is correct. But when you're studying those different religions, you find that they have completely different stories than what you're talking about.
Right, but why do you think that Nate, who lives in India, why do you think Nate would say Christianity doesn't make sense to him?
No idea. You'd have to ask Nate.
Well, let me propose an idea, and you let me.
I mean, if you're asking me to read someone's mind here on the YouTube channel and say, what would this person
Well,
think?
this is a thought experiment.
Obviously.
This is a thought experiment.
But you're asking for someone to become psychic and read their
But
mind.
but if you were to guess why someone from India would not have the Gospels make sense to them, like they could read it, they'd understand what it says, but can you understand why it would not resonate with them?
Well, the thought experiment which you're bringing up would suggest that because maybe the way they were raised may may make it difficult to accept. But that's not the fact. That's a social conditioning. That's not when truth is involved. You can have someone, I know plenty of people in the Middle East who are devout Muslims at one point who researched Islam because they finally had that chance to research them, found out Muhammad was horrible. There are times he was reliable and other times he was absolutely horrible. They got their hands on the Bible. They started comparing and contrasting. And even though it's extraordinarily difficult, I mean, then they can follow the evidence or they can follow what their mom and dad teach them.
Yeah, but that goes both ways. Like there's
right,
Christians
but then
who
that's
become Muslims and
right. But then that's where I beg the question to them is, what is the evidence that Muhammad is reliable when talking about Jesus?
But let's get back to Nate.
Right,
for a
sorry.
second.
All right.
You
no problem.
I agree with your assessment of Nate. You said that the reason why he could read the gospel narrative and it just doesn't resonate with him is, you said social conditioning, how he was raised, the culture he's in. So now the question I have for you is the obvious one. How did you come to the conclusion that you were not just like Nate?
The reason I came to the conclusion I was not just like Nate is because my parents were very open to me studying all the different religions. I've surrounded myself with people who were pretty much agnostic and were open to all possibilities. I surrounded myself with scientists and with spiritual people who were very open to any of these possibilities. And so I also then decided, hey, since I'm raised around a lot of Christians, I need to also take a step aside from Christianity, leave that social construct, and really look at the evidence. What does it lead to? What is it pointing towards? Is there any validity to it? Because sincerity in one's belief points nothing to its validity. I like the one comment. Psychic powers, how ridiculous. Well, if you're asking me to read someone's mind, then obviously it requires some sort of psychological power of some sort to read it. Otherwise, if they don't talk to me, sorry, I had to
Yeah,
respond.
yeah, and I appreciate your answer. What I'm hearing you say is that you did the best you could, and you really were diligent in trying to put your biases aside
Mm-hmm.
and look at each religion and so forth.
Yes, you have to be very objective.
Yeah, but here is, maybe you can help me with this, but I've talked to
Okay.
other people who have said similar things. Doug, I've put my biases aside, and
Mm-hmm.
I really gave Christianity a look, and I tried to, but it just did not make sense. The whole idea of just believing and you're saved, and human sacrifice of one man. And, I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to get sidetracked with the details at this point, but, but the point is they have their reasons of why it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't resonate, why it didn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll just say, I wasn't biased, Doug. Really, I wasn't. It just did not make sense to me.
No, I understand. That's a completely legitimate thing to say. If I would, they're not biased. Obviously, if they have their legitimate question, there's a legitimate question. I've talked to many people who are like that. My next question would be then, well, what is your? You could have objections. What are your questions? Because sometimes a question can hold someone back, but it turns out to have a fairly simple answer, or the answer is simple, but the understanding behind it takes a little bit of time sometimes. It's kind of like when you go through the grades. You get taught something in middle school, and then they don't really explain it to you. Then you get to high school, and you learn a little bit more. Progression of learning. That's what it is. That's also why we have high school, college, universities. Bachelor, associates, bachelors, a master's to PhD. You go a little deeper into what's taking place to reach more of an understanding. So that's the question I would ask them, just to see what question do they have about it, what's their objection, and I agree there's objections, and then to find out what's happening. What basically what is the answer that's kind of there,
I I think
if that makes any sense.
yeah, no, it does. It does. I value truth, and I can tell you do as well. And I think, and let me know if you agree with this.
Okay.
I think part of valuing truth is admitting the possibility that you're wrong.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I'll just come out and ask you, is it possible that you're wrong about Jesus?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's
And I
always
appreciate
possible.
that answer. I really do. I
No,
appreciate that answer.
I will admit publicly right now I could be completely wrong about Jesus. Anything's possible. The question is, what's the evidence leaning towards?
Okay. And so now that you're, I think, in the same boat as me, we're open to the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
What would change your mind about Jesus?
One simple thing, the same thing Apostle Paul pointed out. If any atheist or agnostic, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, whatever you stand, if you can disprove that Jesus Christ never rose from the dead, then my faith is completely bankrupt and I will switch my mind.
Okay.
Completely. If you guys can prove it, or not prove it, no one can really prove anything. But if you can show overwhelming evidence for it, then yes, I will definitely retract my faith.
So that would be is there anything else, or is that the main one?
That's the main one, because put it this way, it's when I look at any religion or look at any kind of faith that anyone has, my biggest thing is to look and say, what is what is the Achilles heel of the system? What is the one thing that if I can show that thing's wrong, everything else falls apart? Kind of like, when you have that, what's that game where you have a bunch of little brick stuff on top of each other and you pull one out and all of them tumble? That's the same kind of concept. Jenga? Yeah, I think so, something like that. So what that's one of the reasons I really appreciate Christianity in general, is because Paul is so open about it and saying, if you can prove or show or pull up a body that's Jesus, or show that Jesus never rose from the dead, literally every Christian's faith is absolutely bankrupt.
I have two thoughts on what you just said, and the first one is I appreciate that you actually have something that would change your mind. That's number one. Number two, my problem with your answer is, though, and I'll take it off you and I'll put it on someone else. If we were talking to a Muslim right now and I asked him the same question I asked you, what would change your mind about Islam and Allah and the whole thing? And he said,
well,
and
okay, sorry.
And if he replied to me, Well, Doug, if you can prove to me that Allah didn't, or Muhammad didn't go into the heavens on a winged beast, I will change my mind.
Yeah, that's when I agree with you. That would be, and I understand that's one thrown at me, but at the same time, you're talking about a supernatural miracle taking place, and you don't really have any eyewitnesses to it. You have one or two people.
Okay, but you're talking about a
Well,
supernatural thing as well.
right? No, I know that's kind of rhetorical of me because the resurrection's a supernatural thing that happened, obviously. But what you're talking about is the reason I would have a difficult time comparing those two is because when Muhammad supposedly rose into heaven on a winged beast, it was only seen by maybe two or three people. Now, two or three people can, if you look at conspiracies, it's very easy for two or three people to hold down a conspiracy. But the problem with the resurrection is it doesn't give you that option whatsoever. The resurrection that's found in the book of Matthew says at the very end that over 500 people saw him over a period of 40 days, eating, talking, being around other people.
But the point still remains, Nick, because let's say it wasn't two or three people, but it was 2,000 or 3,000. How still would one go about proving that Muhammad didn't go into the heavens on a winged beast 1,500 years ago?
Well, the way you would show that is you'd have to look at the eyewitnesses, and you'd have to determine if the eyewitnesses are credible or not. That's as simple as it gets. It's like being a detective in the police. If you're going up to eyewitnesses who are going to knowingly lie, and they have a history of doing it, they have a history of not being truthful about what happened, and the people are not collaborating with them, and their stories are all exactly the same, I would have a big time issue with believing that Muhammad rose on a winged beast. That's the problem I would have.
But the eyewitnesses could not be lying. They could just be mistaken, right?
Well, yes, that's why you have to check the trustworthiness of the
prove
eyewitness.
That? Like how?
Well, you would have to go through it. It's kind of like forensic evidence. I was listening to this guy. He was an old police officer detective who actually did cold case study files, because we can't go back in time 2,000 years ago. So you'd have to do a cold case study. So you'd have to analyze the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You'd have to go back and see what's the variations. I'm not sure exactly the science behind it. I'm still researching it. I found it as an intriguing form, but it would basically be, how are they presenting the story? How are they talking about it? What are they putting into the story? What are they leaving out of the story? What details are there? Are these people trustworthy? Are they coming back from? Are they well known? Or are they just random people who no one knows anything about, and therefore we don't know very much trustworthy behind them? It's kind of like he said, she said. That's ultimately what it leads to. That's why I'm studying more. I kind of got the general idea of the cold case file area from there.
Yeah, the general principle that I'm talking about, though, is when we're talking about miracle claims, which miracles by definition are the most improbable event.
Well, miracles by definition is God putting his hand into creation and changing a law of nature. That's what we define as a miracle.
Right. I'm just talking about that they're unlikely, right? You would agree miracles are unlikely?
Well, they're
unlikely.
Rare? Yes, they can be rare or unlikely, but at the same time, they do happen. That's what because if you're
I'm granting miracles can happen, but here's my problem with your out that you've given yourself, and that is when your default position is, I believe in a miracle until someone proves me it didn't happen.
No. You're not saying that at all. No. What I'm saying is, when you're asking about the resurrection, I was pointing out that people saw him. You asked about how do we know that's truth? Well, so that's why we have to look at the trustworthiness of eyewitness testimony.
No, I asked you what would change your mind, and you said if someone could prove that the resurrection did not happen.
Right.
So now I'm saying to you that I'm uncomfortable with that, because what you're saying is your default position is a rare event happened until someone proves that to me that it didn't.
Well, because that's a nail in the coffin for Christianity. Plain and simple. Jesus claimed to be God. Christians worship Jesus as God. He claimed in the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that he is going to die and then rise again 3 days later. You have this incredible truth claim he is making. He's saying that he's the Son of God. He's going to do this. So the big question is, when he dies, does he rise again?
How did you come to the conclusion that Jesus actually said those things?
The eyewitness testimony that came through with it, plus the 5,200 Greek manuscripts. and pieces of manuscripts I've analyzed that I've translated from Hebrew into English and also from Greek into English that actually have him saying the words, I will die and rise again.
If there were more manuscripts for the Quran, which there isn't, but if there were, would that make the Quran God's word?
No,
So how does it make Christianity God's word?
I never said it makes God.
Or true.
It does. I never. All right, because I never said that the Bible is God's word off the top.
Or reliable.
How would it make it more reliable? Well, let's see here. In the Quran, Muhammad says that Jesus is not God multiple times. Now, in that, with him saying that, the question I propose is, does he know Jesus? Well, Muhammad lived over 500
Nick,
years.
My question was, how does the number of manuscripts, if the Quran had way more manuscripts than the Bible, would you say the Quran is more reliable than the Bible?
I'd have to analyze the manuscripts because you can have someone that lies on all the manuscripts.
Okay, great. So the number of manuscripts is irrelevant to reliability and truth then?
To a certain extent, yes.
Okay, great. We're agreed on that. So now, even if you analyze them and you see consistencies, like you look at, do consistencies make something true?
It could, yeah. I mean, if you're looking at consistencies, and yes, something is obviously true.
Could you have a pure fiction set of books, like a sequel?
Yes, you definitely can.
And that it's perfectly logically consistent. The plot line is perfectly
If you're talking
consistent.
about something kind of like Harry Potter, where it is completely fictional, that you could read it and it's consistent throughout the books about Voldemort, what happened in Deathly Hallows and Hermione Granger and Harry Potter, absolutely. But at the same time, then I would have to read its literary context. Now, is it making
right?
it right? Now, if someone's saying, "Hey, look, this is a fictional book," okay, cool, let me read it. I'll read it, and if it's not saying that it's real historical things, I mean, it has historical locations, but obviously the literary context is talking like Harry Potter, which is Hogwarts, going to Hogsmeade. You know, I go, well, those are real locations. It's obviously J.K. Rowling.
I hear you. I agree with you. But I just want to review that the number of manuscripts does not necessarily mean a book is reliable. The consistency doesn't necessarily mean it's true.
Right.
So what are we left with?
Literary context and archaeological evidence.
Okay, let's take archaeological evidence as well. There's archaeological evidence in the Quran and other holy texts that have been verified to be true. Does that make the rest of the book true?
Well, if you're talking about the Quran, then yes, it is very much true when it comes down to talking about who Muhammad is, where he was at, and what was going on around him at the period in which he was living, of course.
Okay, so some things could be true and some things false.
Yes, I'm not denying that they have truths behind them.
Would you say that some things could be true and some things false within the Bible?
I could say that, yes, that is definitely a possibility. The question is the evidence point to that?
Okay.
Yet again. So, I mean, anything. If you're bringing up, is this true? Can this be true? Can this be true? Obviously, anything of those things can be true. My question is, what is the evidence leading towards? Now, I do believe that the Quran has truth behind it because it is an excellent resource when you want to understand who Muhammad is and what he taught and what his experience is with a spiritual or whatever being he had with a creature named Allah. Whether he had that or not, he clearly had some sort of experience.
I don't believe in Islam and the Quran, and I just use it as an outsider test of faith. And
no, I totally understand.
Yeah,
I totally understand. I'm just saying this is what I understand of it. This is what I accept of it. So, because I have looked at the Quran, I have been reading into it, and I have come to the assertion of, yes, Muhammad did have some sort of experience. There is truth, but honestly, the reason I resent Muhammad and the Quran is because when it came down to talking about who Jesus Christ was, he was not accurate whatsoever. Because
yeah, I agree with you. But I want to talk about the reason why I bring up these other ones is outsider test of faith. But I want to read something for you that is from Suetonius.
Excuse me.
Suetonius was a historian in the 1st and 2nd century A.D.
Right
Right around the time of these events.
Yes.
of the Bible, New Testament.
Well, he
And
was there for the second and first century for the Christian church.
yeah, so basically he was a historian right when the New Testament was written. And so
Well, it wasn't written quite yet.
I want to read how it sounds.
Okay.
So this is what a historian sounds like of that time period.
Go ahead.
Gaius Caesar was born the day before the Calids of September in the consultantship of his father, and Gaius Fortius Capito. Conflicting testimony makes his birthplace uncertain. Gnaeus Lentius writes that he was born at Tibur. Pliny the Elder that he was born among the Treviri, in a village called I can't pronounce it, above the confluence. Pliny adds as proof that altars are shown there inscribed for the delivery of Agrippa. Verses that were in circulation soon after became indicate that he was begotten in the winter quarters of the legions. He who was born in this camp and reared mine arms of the country gave the outset a sign that he was fated to rule. Gaetilicius, I can't pronounce it, is shown to be wrong by Pliny, who says that he told a flattering lie to add some luster to the fame of a young and vainglorious prince. And he lied with the more assurance because Germanius really did have a son born to him at Tibur. You get the feel of what this sounds like? Furthermore, a letter written by Augustus to his granddaughter a few months before he died about the Gaius in question reads as follows, and he quotes someone else. So here is a historian. I could read more, but I won't. Here's a historian writing at that time, and here I'm going to be very honest with you. When I read the Gospels, it sounds nothing like this.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't. I mean, to be honest, I had a hard time keeping up with what you were saying on it.
But let me quote.
If you can summarize what they were saying.
Yeah, the details of it doesn't matter. The reason I read this, is to have you hear what a historian sounds like, and compare it to the Gospels, so we can now say, okay, should we say that this is a historical record, or should we say that this is more literary? And
okay, well, I need more references than just one, to be honest. You have one historical reference that is saying, here's what a historian writes. We should compare all historians to how this one writes. I would say, okay, you can compare one historian, but you need to compare multiple. Multiple have different styles. They obviously it will all sound pretty much the same, but they'll have unique ways of saying it. That's why I trust Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because you have 4 different people recording this historical claim, including a doctor who is recording what took place as well.
So if I provided for you multiple, as much as there's that has been found of historians of that day, if I actually sent that to you via email and they all read with this flavor, would that cause more doubt in your mind that the Gospels are actual historical narrative?
No, it wouldn't cause more doubt behind it, because if you said, okay, hold on a second. Let me put my thoughts together. If I read a whole bunch of historians who write a particular way, will I lose faith that what was written in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is historical narrative? Not really, no. At all, because we still have historians to this day who do reporting in the way that was written in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they're still by the historical societies of Harvard, Yale, and Oxford, still historians. So it really, when you say, well, it doesn't compare to these ancient Greek writers, you're right. I cannot hardly understand them. But we also have people nowadays who write like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, who are historians, who do report the way they do, and they're still known as historians. So, I mean, I don't really see the whole argument here. That's what.
Yeah, let me clear it up a little bit. What the point I'm trying to make.
Okay.
And I'm going to quote.
Okay.
I'm going to quote Richard Carrier from his book of why Suetonius, why what I just read to you.
Well, let me ask you this really fast.
Yeah, sure.
Is it because what I'm hearing is I'm going to be looking at all these different historians, and somehow now I'm going to take that and say that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not written historically, therefore we cannot take it.
No, that's not that. I'm glad you said that. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, that what I read to you, that was written in a very similar time period as the Gospels, there's a difference. They read differently.
No, of course they read
And
differently.
one guy is a known historian writing about events. But let me read to you.
I think I see where you're coming from here,
Yeah.
and I think this was actually brought up, and I was asked about this. Oh, I was asking my pastor about this as well as some theologians. I was also talking to historians behind this over at Fullerton College. Now, you're right. The Greeks wrote particular ways of writing, but at the same time, when you're studying sociology, study of different locations, different people, different cultures, every single one of them wrote differently. Every single one of them spoke differently. They all made historical claims, but they're all speaking in a different format, different way. So to say, well, we're going to look at the Greeks and how this one person wrote in the 2nd century, I would say you also have to look at where in Judea, how did they write their history? How did the Jews communicate their history on that? Because you got to realize it was the Jews, and it was Samaritans, and it was some Greeks in there. And they also were able to communicate history in that fashion. So how were the Hebrews, the Jews, which were the dominant people there, how do they communicate their history?
Okay.
How would they do it in historical literary context?
Okay, what I'm hearing you say is that the gospel writers just did it differently, but it was still history. But let me read what Richard Carey has said about Suetonius compared to the Gospels.
Yes, go ahead.
Suetonius shows how a critical historian behaves. His methods and critical judgment become transparent and laid out for the reader. He names, or at least mentions or describes, his sources. He analyzes the conflicting claims and tells us how he decided on one over the other. Indeed, it is already important that he tells us that there were conflicting traditions. He lists the evidence and criticizes it. He gives us information about the reliability of his sources. For instance, he tells us when a source is anonymous and admits that it's a mark against it. And he tells us what evidence, if any, given author appealed to. Now, Richard Carey goes on to say, Luke, the Gospel of Luke is what Richard Carey thinks is the most historical-ish of the 4 Gospels.
I was going to point that out.
Yeah. But he says this, Luke does none of these things. He never even mentions his method, much less shows his methods to us or any critical judgment at all. He never names even a single relevant source, nor does he give us anything like a useful description of any of his sources, and he certainly never tells us which sources he used for which details of his history. And Luke must surely have known that there were conflicting claims, yet he never tells us about them. But instead,
what are the conflicting claims? Is my question.
But instead, he just narrates the account as if everything was indisputable, never once telling us how or why he chose one version or detail and left the others out. For example, though Luke copies Mark, he never tells us that he did, much less which material and why he changed it. This entails either that Luke is fabricating or preferring some other source that contradicted Mark. So why don't we hear of this other source? And he goes on.
Right. Well, my whole system is he's saying that he didn't do anything. And this is actually from the book of Luke. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled or, been put together among us, just as they were handed down to us by those whom the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since myself have taken careful investigation, everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Typhosus, I think is what his name is, so that you may know that certain things that have been taught. So right now we're already knowing that a lot of eyewitnesses have been talking. And so what happened is Luke is apparently this physician, this guy really trusts, who's over there. And now he's going to give an account for what took place. He's going to be talking to the eyewitnesses. So basically something happened. He wants to make sure that this isn't just someone blowing smoke out, that these eyewitnesses are correct, that there's multiple sources. So what he says, the birth of John the Baptist foretold. So now he's going to be looking into what was in history, what led to this event. In the time of Herod, the king of Judea, there was a priest named Zachariah. So we have a name right there. Who is Zachariah? Who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah, which is, okay, so now we know exactly where that person is. We can look that up in Jewish history. His wife Elizabeth, another person that we can easily verify, was also a descendant of Aaron. Okay, so there's a house of Aaron, which we can find in Judeo history. So we automatically have names and people who we can look up, and tribes, so we can easily
Yeah.
count them. Both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observed all the Lord's commandments. So he's getting this information from people who've talked about them and decreed blameless, but were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. So now we know approximately age. Now we don't know exactly the age of them, but we can probably look at the priestlyhood at that time. You're right, there was missing evidence there. Once, when Zechariah's division was on duty and was having to serve the Lord, the priest, before God. So when was the duty taking place? Now, if you look at the priestly division, it happened during Pentecost. During that time. So you really actually have this surmounting amount of information that this guy is telling you is not there that actually is there.
Okay.
So
you know what? I appreciate
and
that
then,
you read.
well, here's the other
this.
part I'm looking at is the book of Matthew. One of the things I really appreciate about Matthew is Matthew automatically said, okay, I'm Jewish. And the only way a Jewish person would be able to be recognized or to be validated is by studying their genealogy to understand who this person was, where they come from, and what it could possibly mean. And so what Matthew does as a Jew is he goes automatically to genius of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So he goes, Abraham was father of Isaac, Isaac father of Jacob, Jacob father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Prezi, and Zahara, whose mother was Torma. I'm not going to go through the whole list here. It keeps going and going.
I
but
don't
what
like
he's
genealogies.
right, but here's how the Jewish people counted their history, and you got to realize this is different from the Greeks. Is the Jews would count according to what the genealogy was to understand who they were. That's how they made marriage certificates, death certificates. So when
like
this
that
guy,
you're doing this, and I purposely wanted you to keep going and give you like the approximate same time that I read Richard Carrier.
Yeah,
fair time. But here's
the problem I have with Richard Carrier is he's saying this isn't in there, and I'm going, actually the reason he's saying it's not in there is because it's not matching a certain way. He's not. I don't think Richard Carrier is being intellectually honest when he's looking at.
But here's the problem I have that maybe you can help me with.
Okay.
You believe that Jesus rose from the dead.
Yes.
This is an extraordinary claim.
Exactly.
And the evidence that we have for such extraordinary claim is basically the Gospels.
Well, eyewitness testimony found in the Gospels.
No,
correct.
no. This is an important point. We don't have evidence of eyewitness testimony. We have evidence of claims of eyewitness testimony. There's a difference.
We have claims of eyewitness testimony. 1 second. Let's see here.
This is an important point. What evidence do we actually have? We do not have eyewitness testimony evidence. We have claims of eyewitness testimony.
Okay, so the question is the person who's delivering the information reliable or not?
No, you could even go
Yes,
deeper.
that's the question you have to ask.
You can go deeper than that. You can go deeper than that. What would be the deeper question?
You tell me.
How do we know that the eyewitnesses even made the claim in the first place?
I see where you're coming from. That's when you have to look on outside sources to confirm it.
Okay.
That's why you'd have to look at the Shabbat of Israel. The Shabbat of Israel is the Jewish High Council's claim of people are happening, where you have Jesus, and you have them saying that originally the claim was that the disciples stole the body, which is also recorded in the book of Mark. Okay, and then what you have is you have Pontius Pilate, who's also making a decree that Jesus Christ was crucified because he washed his hands of him. That he was.
Before we get into the details.
I know, but this is where we're coming from, because you're saying, how do we know that these eyewitnesses were even making a claim? Well, now we can't. That's kind of an oxymoron. You can't really prove that or show evidence. So we're not going to listen to that evidence in the Bible. So let's look outside the Bible for some evidence that something of this nature happened by reliable resources. So I'm saying Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea during the time, recorded Jesus Christ being crucified. He said that he washed his hands from him, and the Jews took over, which is recorded in the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John included.
But what you're talking about right now, how do you know this?
Because you can record it from the Shebal of Israel, which records this is included. You
When was
also
that
have Greek.
written?
Shebal of Israel is just a recording from, I think, from the time of Egypt to the time past crucifixion of Jesus. I think it goes all the way to the Colossians time. So around the first to the end of 2nd century. So you have it well within Jesus' time,
The end of the 2nd century?
I think.
So you're
I'm still
saying
researching.
so you're saying that the evidence outside the Bible that we have is 100 years later?
No, what I'm saying is the Bible, the thing we have outside the Bible, was recording over 200 years, at least 100 to 200
Okay,
years after.
do you
It's kind of
know
like this. It's
do you know when this evidence was written?
the evidence for Jesus was written within the 1st century.
The
It was
extra
recorded.
biblical evidence.
We know that from the Dead Sea Scrolls.
It was written when?
The evidence for Jesus, it was
Yeah.
written within the 1st century. So about 39 AD
Extra
is when they
biblical I'm
started.
talking about.
Yes, about 39 AD,
39 AD.
approximately.
Are you sure about that?
I said approximately.
No, I mean, the only.
So what you're saying is, how do we know this historical information, Nick, that you're handing off actually delivers correct information, right?
Correct, and
When was-
you said extra biblical sources, and I agree with you.
Extra biblical sources I'm reciting.
And the first one we have is 93 AD from Josephus.
The Tamaj of Israel records in the time when Jesus was crucified who Jesus Christ was claiming to be, and that they also had a very horrible word to say about him, saying he was demon possessed, he was a horrible person, he was causing ruckus. That's what we have from the Jewish Shemal. And the Shemal, like I said, Shemal is not nice, but it records it. But it records
you said it was
him
written
during
in
the time.
39 AD.
No, it was written during the time he was alive. The Jewish High Council wrote it because he had to do for crucifixion, for justification for the crucifixion. So it was written within the 33 AD, 33 to 34 AD. And then on top of that, we have Greek records that come from the Greek Roman governor at the time, Pontius Pilate, who also said, because you had to have Greek records of people that were being crucified and people who were being killed, the tax collections, the whole 9 yards. He was also recording this information. He recorded the exact same time that Jesus was crucified, as according to Roman tradition.
You know, I've talked to a lot of Christians, and you're telling me something that they've never said, because I honestly think you're mistaken.
You can think that. That's fine. But the question you have to ask is,
I could be wrong too. But
what is the evidence leading? I'm not going to tell you to believe what I'm telling you. And obviously you're a skeptic, and I appreciate that highly. I'm telling you a truth claim. When we're done talking here, go online, research what I'm telling you, find out if it's truth or not truth, and then make a judgment accordingly.
You're claiming that there's something written that's not from the Bible.
Yes.
That's written in 39 AD about Jesus.
About approximately right around
okay,
there. It's hard to tell.
I'll give you 5 years leeway. In fact, I'll give you a decade leeway.
Don't give me 5 years leeway. Give me like 4. Because when it was crucifixion, it was about the Jewish High Council had to mark this down. It wasn't like this. Well, kill him in about 5 years. We'll go ahead and put it down.
And you said this is in what text?
This is I believe Shemal of Israel.
Can someone fact check that for us?
Let me double check. I may have mispronounced it. Let me check this out.
Because you're telling me news that I've never heard. I haven't even heard of an apologist say this before. Yeah, how do you spell it? Shemal?
Well, I think. Let me double check this.
I have a good friend in chat right now who is a layman expert in this field, and he's going, I don't know what you're talking about.
All right. Well, I probably mispronounced it or something like that. That's probably what happened here. Let's see. Hold on.
Yeah, and he's. I would also want to know. You mentioned Pilate wrote something, or the government of Pilate, the kingdom of that he was foreseeing. Where is that written, and when is it written?
Hold on, looking it up.
Oh, someone said it's spelled Shema.
Yeah.
But because I've had apologists admit to me when I ask the question, is there any contemporary evidence for
Well, my
Jesus?
question is, let me throw this back at you. Actually, now that I think
Sure.
about it, you were watching a video. You're doing a hard critique. This is how we first started talking to a guy who actually did that research and found out those other people that actually did talk about Jesus outside the Bible. And then you're asking me, well, who wrote them? Who wrote about it? I honestly think that if you were watching that guy and actually listening to him and researching
He
what he
didn't
was
mention what
saying,
you mentioned.
no, I understand. No, I understand that. I probably mispronounced some things. I have a tendency to do that. I am human. I err. But what I'm looking at is you already know this information technically because the guy you were listening to that we first started talking to was already discussing this topic and gave names and gave the information you're seeking. And then you're asking me again. So I'm kind of asking, my question to you
He
is,
said nothing what you just said.
no, I understand that. What did he say then?
He mentioned Josephus, the Talmud.
Okay, Josephus.
Yes.
And who else?
The Talmud, I think he mentioned.
Talmud. Okay.
Yeah. And I think those are the only two, but I know there's 8 others.
Okay, so there's 8 others. So Josephus and the Talmud,
Right.
the comment about him. So you have sources. So basically, you've already answered your question.
Okay, now.
No, well, here's where I'm coming
Okay,
from.
go ahead.
Here's where I'm coming from. You're asking me, and I obviously mistaken it. I'll be honest here. I undoubtedly mistaken it. I know there are outside sources I've come across. But this guy has already told you Josephus and the Talmud. He said there's other resources included. And you're asking me, well, we can't be sure that the eyewitnesses really saw what they saw. So I said, let's look outside for the evidence. You said, well, what are the evidence for that? Well, you already know the evidence for it, so it's kind of a loaded question. You already have that answer.
No, Nick.
Well, you do. You have that answer.
I do know, but can you tell me why I reject it?
I can't tell you why you reject
And
certain evidence.
it's not anything. Or sorry.
Sorry.
Can you guess why I don't put a lot of credence in it, or why I doubt it?
Honestly, I'm not a mind reader. I have no idea.
Okay, I'll just tell you then.
Go for it.
Josephus is the first extra biblical piece of evidence we have of Jesus outside the Bible.
Okay.
It was written in 93 AD.
Okay.
So, Josephus was born even after Jesus died.
Mm-hmm.
Josephus was not an eyewitness.
So let me ask you this.
Do you agree with everything I just said?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was an eyewitness. I totally agree.
So let
me ask you this. Let me twist the name.
I want to answer your question.
Sorry, I'm cutting you off.
This is why I have reason to doubt.
Right.
Because
well, then you have reason to doubt all history.
No, hang on a second.
Okay. Sorry.
This is why I doubt, because here we have an extraordinary claim of a man rising from the dead, which in my opinion requires extraordinary evidence. And what we do have is a person 60 years later, which is more than a lifetime later, saying, and a lot of what he did say is, a lot of historians think it's a forgery, but that aside, is making brief mention of this guy named Jesus, who he never saw. And so where do you think he got that from? Josephus?
Probably from eyewitnesses or people who knew the eyewitnesses.
They would have been dead. You're saying they would have lived to 93 years old?
Unless, of course, they were quoting from Galatians, which is what Paul wrote down within the first century, within 70 AD.
Wait, hang on. Say what you just said again.
Well, they were quoting probably from Paul.
So now it's not an independent source anymore, is it?
Well, let me ask you this. Let me throw it here. You're saying since the resurrection happened, it has to be extraordinary claim. Therefore, it has to have extraordinary evidence. I think the evidence is there. What you're rejecting is a lot of the eyewitnesses who spoke by automatically saying we don't know what happened. They weren't really talking to him. But Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were actually talking to the eyewitnesses and the people who knew the eyewitnesses.
How do you know that?
Because they even make that claim.
Okay, so will you know because they made a claim?
Well, they made a claim, and and the historical reference points to them being reliable because of other outside sources that you've already heard about. Now, here's the second part I want to bring up a question. Well, here's a question I want to bring up to you.
Okay.
You're saying, well, it was a whole lifetime away. Let's see. How do you know that Napoleon lived?
I don't.
Let me just ask you that.
I don't.
Yes, you do. Unless you can't trust the whole history, and then how do you? Then let me ask you a closer one.
Not for certain, I don't. But
okay.
It's not important to me because my salvation is not dependent upon it.
I know, but I'm bringing up a logical part to this. That's what I'm bringing up, not a spiritual part, logical.
Okay.
Let me bring up a closer one. How do you know that George Washington was elected the first president of the United States?
How do I know?
Yes, how do you know?
When you say no, do you mean with 100% certainty?
How do you know? As in, how can you put? What is the overwhelming evidence that points to George Washington?
We have many different types of evidences, not just textual.
Mm-hmm.
I think we even have portraits. We have, don't we have even his own words written down?
How do you know there is?
Well, we don't. We're listing a whole bunch of different types of evidence.
So what's the evidence that it was his words?
We don't know for certain if it was actually his words, but we do have different types of evidences. We have more than just texts. I think we even have coins, right?
The point I'm trying to make here is when you're saying we can't know, is absolutely you can know, because after all, I know about historical relevance. I know about the authenticity behind what we put into history. The reason is because you have to pay a whole heck of a lot of money to go to university and study history. If it was really as irrelevant, if it was really as uncertain as you're suggesting, then why would you pay so much money for that? That's a logical argument towards it.
I agree with you, Nick. I agree with you.
Now, the reason when we look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John for the eyewitnesses. Now, if you're talking about salvation, I can talk about that. That's no problem. If you're talking about eyewitnesses, you're talking about a lot of different kinds of history. And obviously the guy who you were listening to on his presentation on YouTube,
Frank Turek,
gave you information. So the question you have to ask yourself now, and I even ask, is what's the evidence that information was reliable? That's the question.
The one Frank Turek presented?
Yeah, Frank Turek and others have presented that are outside the gospel to give you information about it.
I don't think they give you the evidence that's sufficient for a miracle claim.
Okay, so wait, let me ask you this then. What do you believe right now then? And what is the overwhelming evidence? Because what you've suggested to me is this. There's evidence out there. There's a plethora of information. There's like this much information about the gospel, but this much of evidence way up here must be fulfilled in order for me to believe. So my two questions I have for you is, what do you believe in? And what is the evidence that what you believe in is reliable?
Great question. I believe that the world is a sphere. And I have many types of evidences for that.
I understand that. I'm talking about from a Christian, or what you say being saved, or spiritual, or this miracle taking place. Obviously, there's not enough evidence for you, and I understand that. I can appreciate that. So now I got a question for you as an atheist, or as what was the other one? Sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head.
I'm an agnostic atheist.
Agnostic atheist, which is almost two things differently. But you say that you can't believe in it because the evidence does not match up to what you have. So my question I'm putting in this context is, what do you believe in then? And what is the evidence that what you believe in is reliable from that standpoint?
Okay, so you're asking me...
Not just the earth being a spherical area.
Yeah. You're asking me what would it take for me to believe that miracle claim back then?
No.
Oh.
Well, in essence, yes. But what I'm also asking is, okay, you don't have evidence that you want, so obviously something else has more and more sufficient evidence for you. So what is it, and what is that evidence that points to that being more reliable than the resurrection of Christ?
Well, I just mentioned one example, the spherical earth.
Okay, but that's not an argument for Jesus Christ rising.
I'm not making an argument for Jesus Christ. I'm making an argument to doubt it.
But that's just saying the earth is sphere. Okay, that has no it almost has no context to what we were discussing. It just simply says the earth is sphere. So what's the other evidence? What do you believe in when it comes down to say Jesus Christ rose from the dead? I don't believe it, but I believe something else far more.
Yeah, I'm telling you what I believe in. I believe that the earth is a sphere. I believe that the earth rotates around revolves around the sun. I believe that, let's see, what else? All the evidence points that the sun will rise tomorrow morning, but it may not. But that's what I believe.
Okay. So you're a naturalist.
No, if what you mean by naturalist is that there is no God, then no. But if what you
Well,
mean
then
by...
you can't be an atheist. Because an atheist is someone that says there is no such thing as God. There's nothing out there. A naturalist
Okay,
or
this is a
atheist.
big...
That's
This is a big...
because I've talked to many atheists. I've talked to many atheists in my classes. I've talked to many atheists online. I've had podcasts with them, and all of them conclude you don't sound like an atheist. It sounds very strongly you're just agnostic. You say atheist, but you're not actually in the context.
This is a great...
of atheism.
this is a great conversation.
Yeah, totally. What I see is you're saying, I believe these things, I believe this, but here's the system. An atheist does not believe there's a God. An atheist rejects the form of a God.
Correct.
He says that everything comes from nothing. That's even what Richard Dawkins, Stephen Hawking, Christopher Hitchens, who are actually devout atheists, even Friedrich Nietzsche, the great philosophical atheist of his day, even said. There is no God. There's no nothing. There's nothing out there. There's no ultimate purpose. Stop messing around. Stop acting like there's something there. All you see is what is in front of you. That's atheism. Agnosticism is saying, yes, there's probably a higher being. Now, true agnosticism, because I've talked to many agnostics when in my working environment in podcasts.
Your words per minute are sky high right now. You need to slow down a little bit, please.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Sometimes I get into it, I get really excited.
Can I respond to the atheist, because I think that's a very good point, and I am open to the idea of your God existing. I am open to the spiritual realm. I am open to miracles. But the reason why I call myself an atheist is because I don't believe that it is true. I don't live my life like it's true. But believing and knowing to a very, very high degree of probability are two different things. Like, for example, do you believe your car is outside right now?
Yes.
Do you know it is?
No, someone could have stolen it, sure.
Exactly. They're two different things, aren't they? So belief and knowledge...
Well, anything is possible. The question is, what's the evidence?
Right, exactly. I agree with you. But my broader point is that I can say that I don't believe in God and still say at the same time that a God could exist.
Well, if God does not exist, but he could exist, how does that function?
I never said that God does not exist.
But if it's... Okay, well, you said
I
you're
said
an
I don't
atheist.
believe that God exists. Just like
Okay,
you
hold
believe
on.
that your
But
car
this
is
what
outside.
you're saying. You're saying you don't believe God exists, but now you're saying, but I do believe that a God could exist.
Correct.
That's what you just said.
Yeah.
Okay, so what you're saying is there's no God, but there's a possibility of a God. Which one is it? Because agnostic says there is a possibility of God. The atheist says there's no possibility of God
Not
whatsoever.
this atheist.
Okay, but that means that you're not living true atheism according to Friedrich Nietzsche, Stephen Hawking, Richard Dawkins, or Christopher Hitchens. It means you're living out an agnosticism behind it. I've listened to that guy 100,000 times.
I encourage you to ask 10 atheists that you meet over the next year.
Oh, I've asked many atheists.
No,
I've
but
asked
ask them this
hundreds of
specific question. Do you
Okay.
say that there is no God or that there can't be a God? Ask them
Yes,
that specific question.
I've actually asked that question
Okay,
exactly.
and
the
then
way you-
how many out of 10 will say, yes, I do say that? What has been your
Yeah,
experience?
they've about a good 85% of them say there is absolutely no chance of a God existing. And the other ones say, I was atheist, but I'm kind of more agnostic than anything else. And therefore, I guess I'm more agnostic is what they respond to me as. So I appreciate their intellectual honesty. The atheists I have talked to who are actually atheists, not just agnostic, atheists, are more in consistency with what Friedrich Nietzsche, Stephen Hawking, Richard Dawkins, and Christopher Hitchens explains as atheism, which is, in fact, atheism. Agnosticism, when I've talked to many other
Richard
people...
Dawkins, I've heard say that...
Richard Dawkins is a devout atheist. He's come out and said he's a devout atheist. He said, to believe, and I will quote him, to believe in God is literally idiocy.
Right.
That is called atheism.
He says that, but does that mean that he... I think I've heard Richard Dawkins say, well, of course you can't prove a negative, so is it possible that God exists? And
Well,
he,
yes, and then he looked like he was swallowing a hard horse pill when he said it.
right.
Yeah,
So
because he was reaching a philosophical point.
it's
Exactly.
like saying, imagine this cup is filled with jelly beans, and I tell you there's 247 jelly beans in here.
Doesn't make it real.
No, hang on.
Okay.
And then I ask you, do you believe that there's 247 jelly beans in here? And you didn't count them, and so you would say, well, no. The odds are there's a different number.
Mm-hmm.
But that's different than saying that there can't be 247 jelly beans in here.
No, I understand where you're coming
So
from. But
atheism is just not believing.
I guess what I would then say to rebuttal what I said would be the category of three different ones. There is the God-hating atheists, which are like Christopher Hitchens, God rest his soul.
Antitheists
About
is what you're talking about.
Anti-theists, which are not real atheists, who are out there just going, I hate God, it can't exist. Well, how can you hate something that doesn't exist? That's complete stupidity. Then there are people out there who actually don't believe in a God, but they're open to it, but they're saying they're evident. They're clearly pointing out that there's not enough evidence for them to believe, that's why I throw my question to you. And the third one would be the agnostic. I believe there is a God out there, but we don't know who he is or what he is. We can't really understand him, which is agnosticism. So I would still put you more as an agnostic, to be honest, because you do believe that miracles happen. There's a large
Could
part of
happen.
you that
I actually don't believe any miracles have happened.
So the question is, I guess, if there's a question about miracles, the question is there a miracle maker? Because if you don't have a God, there's no possible way of having a miracle happen. And that's what the atheists have. This is one of the big problems I have. I'm going to go a little bit on atheism here. The problem I have with atheism is saying that everything comes from nothing, which is feasibly impossible. That's what Albert Einstein easily pointed out during his scientific research and mathematical study. He said nothing can't create something. So you need a miracle maker to make it happen. The problem with atheists is there is no miracle maker. Also, the philosophical side and the moral side of the atheism I can't agree with at all, because it's also moral relativism, which means that human life is no different than if I decide I like pizza or asparagus. You can slaughter someone or not slaughter someone. It's entirely up to you. And that's also when Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosophical atheist, pointed out, saying, life ultimately is meaningless. And the only thing an atheist logically has to think about is why not kill yourself? Because life has no meaning. There's no ultimate purpose behind anything. You have no reason to live. And he was very consistent. He actually, Nietzsche in his writings, attacked a lot of the German atheists and said, how dare you even assume that you have purpose in your life?
Can we get back to you?
Sorry, I know. I was just rambling a little bit on that.
I wanted to just recap like in 20 seconds. And you tell me.
Oh, are we running too late on this one?
No. It sounds like we both don't have lives, and nobody in chat has a life either. So, but I want to recap because I think it's good to stay focused here.
Okay.
You were raised in a Christian home, a nominally Christian home in a Christian culture, but it didn't really mean anything until you were 17, 18 years old. You had an experience.
When I had the experience from Christ. That's correct.
Well, no, you had an experience. You didn't know it was from Christ yet. Then you investigated it.
I investigated. Well, yes, I had the experience. I knew. I rebutted that I did know it was Jesus. Now the question was, how do I know it was Jesus?
Right. And so
have you ever?
So again, I'm recapping here. So
you
had the experience. After investigation and research, you came to the conclusion that this experience was the source of it was Jesus Christ.
Yes.
Then, how long did that process take place? That process of researching?
About a year.
Okay, so you're 18, 19 years old now?
Dude, I'm 29.
No. At this point in the story.
Oh, yes. No, I was just turning 18.
Okay. And so now you're 19 years old, and you've been a Christian since, right?
I became a full-blown Christian at the age of 18 when the evidence pointed to it being reliable, and I accepted Jesus Christ.
Okay. So,
because you can look at all the evidence, but it's when you accept Him, that's when it changes.
Okay. And I'm assuming that from that time to now, you've grown more and more in your belief?
Mm-hmm. After researching more and more into it, yes.
Okay.
And studying other world religions, of course.
Would it be safe to say that the things you know now about your belief, your Christianity, is way more than what you knew back then.
Absolutely.
Okay. So my question to you is, the things that we've been talking about, like you've been bringing up Nietzsche, you've been bringing up First Cause, and you've been bringing up historical evidence and extra biblical sources. What percentage of this did you actually know at the time when you became a believer? If you were to put in a percentage.
Maybe 20% of it, to be honest. Yet again, it's because the evidence I could get my hands on, that's what pointed me towards it. I mean, when I look at it, because I understand there will be atheists out there or agnostics who say, well, you didn't have this plethora of information. You're right. But yet again, when you go to school in high school, you don't have a plethora of information about physics. You don't have a plethora of information about history. You don't have a plethora of information about psychology. You don't have a plethora of information about a lot of different things. You base your actions and what you believe in on what you know and the evidence, what you have presented. That's what you base your beliefs on.
So what I'm trying to get at here is, and I'm going to take it off you, and I'm going to put it on someone else. I'm going to put it on a hypothetical person who is...
Okay, that's fine.
And I'm not even going to name a religion because I don't want to have the temptation to delve into it.
Okay, I won't delve into it.
So you have a person who knew 20% of what they believe today, but based on that 20%, they made this commitment in their life to this belief.
Yes.
And they spend the next 10 years of their life gathering evidence and confirming what the decision they made 10 years ago.
Okay, yes.
So now I'm describing a religion that's not yours. And in fact, I'm describing right now a religion that you would say is false.
Which would be?
Well, all religions are false other than Christianity, right? Which is not a real religion because it's about a relationship with Jesus. I get that. But Christianity is a unique belief system because it makes exclusive claims. So my point is, all the stuff we've been talking about boils down to one thing for you, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. And that is this experience you had.
Nope.
Because if that experience didn't happen, would you say you would still be a Christian?
Nope.
You would not be a Christian if the experience didn't happen?
I told you at the very beginning the one thing that would cause me to leave.
No. I'm asking if I'm not asking what would cause you to leave. I'm saying if this experience would not have happened to you, do you think you would have been a Christian today?
No idea. I have no idea what would have transpired. I would have no idea if God had revealed himself in a different way to me. I have no idea what he would have done. It's really more a hypothetical thing, and quite honestly, I have no idea. Would you have left Christianity if what approached you had changed?
Yeah, I understand. I understand it's a hypothetical, and we can't know for certain. But I'm just asking like a probable question. The
probable answer would probably be yes. I totally would have gone a different direction. That's probably what you're looking for. I am honestly saying I have no idea. I thought that myself multiple times after my research. If what I felt or what I experienced or whatever happened, if what I gathered was not accurate, well, I changed my mind. I would obviously go for the evidence. But if that experience had never happened to me, I don't know I don't know.
Because I find that a lot of differences between believers and non-believers and believers within different religions. Like I don't know how many rabbis you've talked to or how many Muslims you've talked to.
Several.
But it's amazing to me how you can take one piece of our conversation today, and they will say, I can't believe Nick said that. How can Nick believe that? It just makes no sense. And then the Christians listening and saying, I can't believe how Doug would even question this. Like, what? There might not be eyewitnesses? Like, how silly is that Doug would say such a thing? And we have this battle of biases and battle of ideas where I think we all want the same thing, and that is to know what is true.
I guess my question, we want to know that's truth, and you're looking for objective truth rather than relative. So you're seeking a whole lot. You're saying, I'm skeptical, I don't have all this evidence, I believe the earth is a sphere, orbits around the sun. But let's talk the philosophical for a moment. because that's where I really feel this might be drawing the Lord's leading.
I hate philosophy.
I know, but you have to answer this. But here's the thing: if you're talking about this, you have to answer a philosophical question. That's simple as it.
Okay,
because Jesus made philosophical questions.
Go ahead.
So my philosophical question to you is: what do you believe in, and what is the evidence of what you believe in is reliable? Again, because that's where I feel. I was praying. I've been praying this whole entire time. I've been trying to feel what leading, but it just feels like Lord's saying, "You got to ask him this." He's going for me, but at the same time, he's asking these questions. He's not asking the right question. He's going for all these other ones, and really, he has a problem with the philosophical side. And right there, when I said the philosophical side, you said, "I hate the philosophical side." He's right on when he said that. So now my question,
can you give me an example of an answer I could give that you would be okay with?
Oh, I'm not looking for one that I would be okay
because
with.
I gave you that I believe that the Earth is a sphere.
You gave me some scientific ideas, scientific facts. I understand that.
So you want me to give you...
I agree with you. I'm saying a philosophical side, because what you're saying is, well, the Earth spins. Okay, you die. The Earth still spins. Congratulations. I'm not asking that. What I felt him asking, and what you said you hated, is what do you believe in philosophically then? And what is the evidence what you believe in philosophically is reliable?
Yeah, I'll try better. I'll try again. I believe that it is good to increase the well-being of humans.
How do you... Okay, well then, who determines that?
It's a long and hard process. That
well, who? Or is it people? Is it just, let me make it simple.
People, yes.
Is that... Okay, so people. People determine what's good for society, right? Okay.
Yes.
So are you saying it's a relative perspective? Because everyone has different opinions. Everyone does.
Yes and no.
Okay, so hold on. But here's what I'm leaning towards.
Okay.
You're saying this. It's people. People have different perspectives. Different cultures have different perspectives. Different societies have different perspectives. Some societies say it's okay to exterminate Jews because that's perfectly fine. That helps them out. And that is perfectly legit. Some people say it's okay to be racist against black people because that's fine too. Society determined that. Some people say it's okay for you to kill and eat your babies because that's fine as well. So you're basing your philosophy on people. That's a very, very dangerous thing because people change their opinion. Look at the news, for instance. You have people that change their opinion every 5 seconds. We call politicians out for changing their opinion, and yet they write laws that determine our societal rules. Not everyone agrees on it. So having that is no different than like what Frederick Nietzsche points out, saying your faith is bankrupt ultimately. Because, congratulations, someone may say, you may say, hey, being hateful towards Jews is wrong. Well, society says it's fine. Even Gandhi pointed this out. He pointed out that he was very racist in South Africa at the time he was there. At the same time, you're pointing out, but what I'm saying here is you're putting your whole faith and your whole entire goodness. And what is goodness, by the way? How would you possibly know what goodness is when it's all determined on what other people say, what society thinks of it? So that's a very subjective thing, because ultimately, if it's subjective society, society can say, hey, I like pizza one day, I like asparagus the next day. Hey, Jews are worth nothing. Or next day, hey, blacks aren't worth anything. And then on top of that, they can also say, hey, guess what? You personally, here on YouTube, you have no worth. Your worth is to be shot in the head. And honestly, by your own philosophical logic, that's fine. And if you said that's wrong, so what? That's your opinion. I never said
it's fine to shoot someone in the head.
I know. But here's the thing. I'm saying is, they would say it's okay to do it. You would disagree with them, right? Obviously. But under what your own philosophical logic would be is, so what? That's your relative perspective. It's beans and broccoli. You're not wrong. They're not wrong. You're not right. They're not right. It's all determines on who has the gun or not. That's the problem. I had a podcast about this called Human Worth, Intrinsic or is it relative? Where I talk about this and say, we can't this is why the Bible is so critical. This is why God is so critical. This is why our society, when you read the Declaration of Independence in the Constitution, it says we have inalienable rights given to us by our Creator, saying that mankind, society, people don't determine your human worth. God decides it. You have intrinsic worth given to you by God. And
Would
therefore
you agree that you've talked quite a bit for the past little bit?
I'm sorry. My bad. I tend to do that. Just tell me to shut up.
Here, I want to show you a picture.
Okay.
And believe me, this is related to what we're talking about.
Okay.
If I asked you to destroy these things, these 5 things, one at a time, just no reason, rhyme or reason for it, but you have to destroy these things one at a time, which one would be the first you would do? Which one would be the last, based on just your internal feelings you would get, like for shame or guilt? What would the
Are you
order
talking
be?
about the conscience?
I'm asking you. I give you.
You're asking me about the conscience. That's what you're asking me about. You're asking what my conscience would have me do or not do. That's all.
What would what would your order be?
Rock and the leaf first? That's fine.
And then?
But it all. Well, let me ask you this then. Because you're saying which one would you take out first? The Nazis did the exact same thing when they had people being slaughtered. So you're asking for intrinsic worth. Which one has more intrinsic worth?
All I'm asking you is for an order right now, and you're hesitating. What's your order?
You're right. I would hesitate because, honestly, I appreciate all life in all forms.
You have to destroy these one at a time. What would be your order?
I wouldn't. Plain and simple. I wouldn't.
If you don't do it, the person you love is going to die. What order would you do?
See, now you're being a crass manipulator. That's what you're doing. You're playing a psychological crass manipulating game. This is the same thing Adolf Hitler's Hitchman did. This was the same thing the Soviet Union did when they went around slaughtering people. They had people being psychologically mistreated. Therefore,
slow down.
This is what happened.
Slow down. Can you explain to me why you're hesitant to answer this?
Because there's no correct answer out of it.
I agree. I'm asking you for your intuitions. I'm asking you.
I told you. All life has value.
You said rock, then leaf. This is a thought experiment. Thought experiments are great philosophical tools. So this is a philosophical question, and you said you liked philosophy, or I think you did.
Well, the question was for you on the philosophical end, not so much me, the philosophical.
But my question is, why are you hesitant to answer this thought experiment?
Because it reminds me very much of what happened in Nazi Germany and during the Russians and the Soviet Union when they found ways to make people kill each other and lose their conscience, or as Apostle Paul would call it, sear the conscience off.
Okay. Let me give you what my guess would be for most people on the planet.
Go for it.
I think most people would start saying they would have no problem destroying a rock and then leaf, and that's where you ended, and you for some reason stopped there. But then most people would say, well, hey, if I accidentally stepped on a butterfly that was on the sidewalk, I'd feel bad, but c'est la vie. Then would probably come the hamster or mouse, whatever that is, and lastly,
I say hamster.
And lastly would come the dolphin.
So let me ask you this: what would be your answer?
Hang on, that would be my answer too. But now, if we were to ask every person on the planet, every adult thinking person on the adult, that order, I think that order might deviate a little bit, but for the most part, it would be the same answer. Now, here's the kicker. Your holy book says nothing about this, about why this order would take place.
Okay.
Now if that is true, that your holy book doesn't say, no, thou shalt not kill.
It doesn't say thou shalt not kill.
Sorry.
The Ten Commandments never say thou shalt not kill.
My point is that this is pointing to, if everybody in the planet would have a similar order, it's pointing to something fundamental within humans.
Okay, so we have a conscience, is what you're saying.
It's pointing to maybe there's something about us genetically that might lead to this, because holy books don't answer this question.
Yes, they do.
No, not the order question.
They talk about, they do talk about a value system. They do talk about that.
Right. But I'm asking it, why this specific order? Why is it that when a species gets closer to our own, we tend to be more hesitant?
Yes, I know. Let me ask you a question is not an answer. I know. Thank you. Sorry.
Did you hear what I just said?
No, I didn't. Sorry, I was reading.
I'm saying that I'm asking, why is it that when a species becomes closer to our own species, we tend to, dare I say, value it more? Like we can
get attached.
When's the last time you felt sad that you stepped on an ant? But
you're right.
But both of us would be very sad if we accidentally killed a dolphin.
So you're saying basically is The reason we have feelings towards each other is because it's just genetics.
No, what I'm saying is that there might be another explanation for the thing you're talking about, and what we're really talking about here is
What would be the
morality.
explanation?
The explanation is that concepts like well-being, compassion, valuing human life,
But that's okay.
let me finish, were
No, sorry, go ahead.
were beneficial for our species' survival.
I've heard that one many times.
Okay, so yeah, so if you
What you're
heard many
talking
times,
about
it's-
is Darwinism. What you're talking about is Darwinism.
no,
Darwinism
I'm
does
talking about
not teach
evolution. Darwin is
evolution in the areas what you're talking about is
Yeah.
Darwinism. That's
Yeah.
what Charles Darwin talked about when he talked to a man named Mr. Graham.
So is
If you
it
read his
possible
book-
that that might be the correct explanation?
Not really, because when you see
not
when you're
possible.
when you're talking, well, possible, but the evidence doesn't lead that way. When Charles Darwin was talking to a man named Mr. Graham, he was
I
talking
don't.
of
Charles Darwin could be dead and never wrote anything about what he did, and we would still have evolution today. It's not about Charles Darwin. I'm talking about evolution.
Well, Charles Darwin addressed this issue in saying
Right.
about genetics and about species, and if species, by helping ourselves evolutionize, by becoming more advanced, we have to follow certain things in order to be evolved. That is exactly what he points out. That's why I brought it up. And that's why when you say, well, I don't care about that, well, that's exactly the argument.
If evolution
problem-
were true, Nick,
Evolution is true.
if
Evolution.
sorry, if evolution via common descent were true, would you have to give up Christianity?
Most likely.
Really?
But the thing is, well, if it came to assenting, that doesn't change the fact of what Jesus taught. Doesn't change the fact of what Jesus did. Doesn't change the fact of historical records pointing into him rising from the dead. That has nothing to do with that. The other half I have an issue with, and I disagree with you on, is when you say, well, we're going to, if we help each other out, it helps us ascend. I'm sorry, that's called the philosophy of evolution. That doesn't really follow suit with anything Charles Darwin wrote. And the reason I keep bringing him up is because he's relevant to this point. Charles Darwin made it clear that when he looked at origins of species, that species, a survival of the fittest. If you can evolve to survive, that's what you do. He didn't show compassion in the world. The only people he really saw that had any compassion were human beings, and human beings could teach some animals some compassion. That's what you see with dogs. You can see with other
But
animals.
you were quick to say that you do believe in evolution, but you said it's micro,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
I want to understand your position. What is the difference to you between micro and macro evolution?
I believe the scientific definition of it from Science Weekly, which simply says microevolution is evolution within a kind, within species, which is why I've observed 100 out of 100 times. Now, macroevolution is
Actually,
saying
the
we
word
go.
kind.
Yes, kind. It used the word kind, just like canines, felines, equus. Those are kinds. Those are described as kinds in science. There are species within those kinds. There are thousands and thousands of species within the kinds, but there are kinds nonetheless. Now, what you see in microevolution.
I've never seen the word kind in the scientific literature. This is news to me.
Okay, well, I saw in Science
Someone can
Weekly.
fact check that. Is the word kind in any scientific journal as far as describing? Is it? I've heard genus, and you mentioned
genus. Actually, no, that's right. Genus is for species, is for the kind. That's a genus.
Okay, so you meant
kind
genus when you said kind.
Yes, I apologize for
Okay.
that. So yes, genus. What you don't see is one genus becoming another genus, which is basically a fish doesn't become a monkey. We have heard that from Richard Dawkins. I've heard it from Christopher Hitchens. I've heard it from many other atheists.
So describe to me. So your understanding of microevolution is that things.
Microevolution is a species evolving into another species, such as a dog being bred.
Right, I'm asking
into,
about
like,
micro. Your understanding of microevolution is that a species just changes over time, but doesn't change into a new species.
Oh, they're saying kind is science. And other ones are saying nope, and then yes, they are. So, so I guess yes, genus and kind, yes. What I'm saying is in micro is saying you have a Labrador, you can breed it into a pit bull by using a pit bull in a laboratory and breeding them over and over again to get the pit bull.
Okay, so I want to be clear. You're saying that microevolution is when parents have offspring and the offspring is different than the parent, and many generations can take place, and you can get like a wolf going into a canine into a poodle. Am I understanding right?
As long as it's in the canine, yes. Canine kind, yes.
Okay, so let's say those changes. I'm understanding you. These changes take place. So let's keep it in the dog family for now.
Okay.
If the dog gets kind of engineered by man to, through breeding to become a really tiny, I don't know, what's the tiniest dog alive? The Chihuahua or the
I think
poodle,
so, like
toy
Chihuahua.
poodle? I don't know.
Or Shih Tzu or something. I don't know.
Now, that little tiny dog cannot breed with that huge dog or even the wolf that came before it. Would you agree with that with me?
No.
Like, can a poodle breed with a wolf?
Sure, if you get the semen off of the male one and you put it to the female one, heck yeah,
with
you
viable
can.
offspring? I don't know. Maybe
Yes.
they can.
Yes, you can. I've seen it before. I grew up in a small town called Bishop up north in Northern California, central
You've
California.
seen a poodle mate with a wolf?
No, I've seen it where they have injected semen into the animal to make sure that they could be impregnated with it.
A poodle?
That's what you have.
You injected a poodle with wolf semen?
Not a poodle, but I'm saying is within the genus type, you have a wolf is canine. You also have poodle, canine, same kind. You can put those two species together. That's fine. It would work. Come on, man. Think about this.
What is the difference between a species and a genus to you?
Well, I'm guessing by the genus means kind. A species is within a kind. Kind of like you have a species called Chihuahua. You have a species called
But what makes a
Dachshund.
species a species? Like, what exactly about...
I don't know. A species is... Oh, go ahead.
Well, the reason why I'm asking this question, because this is fundamental with how evolution works. And when I hear you say, I don't know what a species is, then
I know what a species is. I'm saying is, when you say, how do you define it? I'm not a biologist by any means, but I'm looking at it from my personal experience going, if you have a kind, like horse or equus kind, you have canine kind, feline kind, as long as they're in that kind, you could mate two different species within that kind and they produce offspring.
Okay, from my understanding...
As simple as that.
From my understanding, I could be wrong, but what makes a species is the ability to have viable offspring. When I say viable, I mean like...
so you can reproduce these things. You can actually breed them. Yes.
Okay, so now if we're
what
agreed,
you're saying is pretty much the same thing I'm saying.
Okay, good. So we're agreed. Now, my question is, if you believe in microevolution, where species change, is it possible then that they might change to such a degree that they can no longer mate with where they came from?
No, not really. No, because the genetics actually match up to 99.98%. That's why I talked to a veterinarian and Bishop over it, and they were talking to me about the whole system. I had the same question. They can't. They can breed within each other. That's fine, as long as they're in the same kind. It's possible. Now, you might not want to breed a big dog with a little puppy or a little Chihuahua because it'll be hard for the Chihuahua to give birth, obviously. So you got to be smart about it. But it's fine. You could still breed it. And I know where you're coming from. It's going into the macro evolution part. No, it doesn't lead that direction. It stops immediately. You can have apes that are very close to how humans are and try to breed them together. It doesn't work. The egg doesn't take it. It doesn't live.
The thing that I'm struggling with is if you believe in microevolution, you believe that species can change, but you don't believe they can change to the extent where they can no longer breed with...
no, because the evidence doesn't point that way.
The evidence doesn't point that way.
No, it doesn't. Can you please point out in a laboratory area where they actually have that happening?
Well, that's why I had Pete on before, because he is a microbiologist and he does that with bacteria all the time, but you would say it's within the kinds.
A bacteria, okay, no, but here's the thing. A bacteria that's what it is. It's a bacteria. If you're talking about a single cell to a complex cells, that's a totally different story. If you're looking for a single-celled organism like a bacteria versus a complex cell organism like yourself, that's two different worlds.
I understand your position. What would you have
So
to
a bacteria stays a bacteria.
what would you have to see? What specific evidence would you need to see in order for you to say, yes, macroevolution is true?
Oh, well, let's see. I'll answer this one. I'm gonna get going, to be honest, because I have to make some dinner. It's getting late.
Okay.
No worries. I'll answer this one. We'll have other conversations. I would have to see, first of all, where was this done? Who did it? What was the experiment repeated? As in, if it happened at UCLA, does it happen at Berkeley? Does it happen at Texas State University? 3, what was the outcome of it? And how did they do it?
Do what exactly? Like, what exactly are you talking about? Like, you're talking about people and places, but what?
I need a repeat of the experiment. I need to know.
What experiment would you need repeated?
Well, if it comes down to like a complex cell, like a dog, you'd probably need the egg to accept the sperm in order for it to divide and become a dog. Or if it's a cat, to become a feline. Or if it's a bacteria, it had to become a single-celled bacteria. It's pretty self-evident at that point. What you're looking for is it depends on what you're trying to create. So if you're trying to create like a dog, or you're trying to make a dog into, say, like a bird or something, the only way I would accept it is if you were able to show the experiment, repeat it, and observe it, and be able to measure everything that's going on.
Okay. So I think you answered my question. So in order for you to accept macroevolution, you would have to see a dog being created into a bird?
I would have to see that was just an example. You'd have to show me something that's one kind turning into another kind. Simple as that.
In a short time frame?
It has to be observable. It has to be right. I have to be able to observe it taking place. I can't take it on any kind of faith. It has to be right there that I can witness it, I can measure it, and I can repeat the experiment.
Yourself, or you?
I can repeat it. Somebody else can repeat it. I can observe someone repeating it. Any of those. It has to meet that criteria.
Because you don't want to. Because you don't want to take it by faith.
Exactly.
Can you repeat
Scientists
the
are always
resurrection
saying that
of Jesus?
faith is a dirty. Well, that's a different story. See, you're going on two different. Well, no. Here's the problem here. This is what I'm seeing. What you're doing. You're saying you follow it on this scientific faith, on science, but you accept Jesus. Well, that's two different evidence to work with.
But this is
you're
an
not
important
being
one.
consistent that way. I think you're frozen.
Oh, let's see. I think you're frozen, but you can still hear me, right? Oh, I think we're losing him. If you can still hear me, refresh. Let me type in that chat. Hit the refresh button. Am I okay for everyone? Yeah, I think I am. Oh, wow. The reason why I even went to the evolution thing is because he did say that if evolution were true via common descent, then he would have to give up Christianity. So that's why I spent some time on it. Yeah, I agree, JD. If his comment about he would have to see a dog go into a bird or something like that, that's repeatable, that he himself could do, is a violation of natural selection. It saddens me a lot that there's so many people in this country who don't even understand evolution. Who's to blame for that? I don't know. I guess the education system. But maybe it's just religion. I don't know. I'm just waiting a little bit to see if he comes back, but to say goodbye. I need a goodbye. I need a goodbye hug. I'm going to try to decompress here by saying he had this experience, and that was the pushing the ball over the hill. That's what got everything started. And I think because of where he was raised, the culture he's in, if he would have been in a different culture, raised differently, he would be a different type of believer. I think there's a high probability and a ton of evidence to support what I just said. But he was raised in a Christian culture. And surprise, surprise, he ended up being a Christian because all the other religions didn't make sense, but Christianity did. And then the next 10 years, he spent, I believe, justifying his position. Saying, researching, listening to apologetics, confirming what he already believed. And this is not new. This is what I think it's human nature to do such. But, and I'm going to appeal to the Christians watching right now, if you value truth, then I believe the first step is to admit that you could be wrong, that you're actually looking at the evidence the wrong way, that there's explanations and possibilities that you have not seriously considered. And with the evolution thing, I just don't... Nick, if you're listening, watching, there's absolutely nothing I can say to change your mind. Nothing. I encourage you, though, Nick, if you're listening, find someone who you really respect and admire that does believe in evolution via common descent, and spend some time talking about it. Because until you actually talk about these things with someone who you value and respect as another human being, that you have a personal relationship with to some degree, everything I say, everything that you could ask for in a link or a document, it's going to go on deaf ears. It sounds like he really wants a God to be real. Maybe there's great comfort in it. The idea of just dying and that's it is not a good thought for many. Actually, I find finality comforting. I really do. But that doesn't mean it's true. There could be an afterlife. A few weeks ago, I was walking in the footsteps of Darwin at Cambridge. Ah, right on, JD. Good to see you here, JD. How many Christians are here, by the way? If you're a Christian, type 1 in chat. Jerry Coyne, Why Evolution 2, great YouTube video. Yeah, I do understand why he said that if evolution is true via common descent, then he has to give up Christianity because the Genesis narrative falls apart. But there are Christians who have consolidated that somehow, some way. So I think Nick could find someone that he respects and admires. I think even guys like William Lane Craig believe in evolution via common descent. So even if there's an apologist that he admires and respects, maybe he can delve into that. Doug, let's have a philosophy talk. I'm a practical guy, Ocean. I was raised on a farm. It's all about wearing boots and getting dirty and putting rubber to the road. I don't mind talking about philosophy for a little bit, but... And I guess someone could say that everything we talked about tonight was all, in essence, philosophy, but... Yeah, good point, JD. Roman Catholics, the Pope, but I'm sure Nick would say that Roman Catholics are not Christians, not true Christians. Doug, how many Christians do you think watch you as a percentage? Depends on the video. When I do critique videos of apologists, you can answer your own question by looking at my dislike to like ratio. When I put out a video, I get quite a few likes. But if you watch my Frank Turek video, I'm noticing that theists, Christians are starting to find it, and the dislikes go up. But that's good. I want the dislikes to go up, because then I know theists are watching. Biologos.org. Very good, Matthew Price. That is, I'm familiar with that website from Cam. If you're a Christian listening, please check out biologos.org. They're a Christian organization who do believe in evolution via common descent. And hear them out. If you believe in microevolution but not macro, go check them out. biologos.org. I just need to understand philosophy. I'm reminded of Blab days when I was talking to Nomad about consciousness. Just threw up a little bit in my mouth. Of course, do see the others, YEC, OEC, progressive, creationists. But yeah. Okay, guys. I don't know if that was fruitful or not. I don't know if Nick likes me, hates me, thinks it was a waste of time. I sort of think it was fruitful, but maybe not so much for me and Nick, but for people watching. So take care, guys. Have a great night, and hopefully the world's not going to fall apart tomorrow morning when we wake up from what's happening in the Middle East. Take care.